The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we are joined by a very special guest, all-around great guy, person on Stat Check, Inez Wilson. Inez, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it is. You've been on the show a bunch of times, and for those of you who don't know, Inez is a phenomenal Warhammer player, definitely top in the world, world class, and he is here because he's a list innovator. He always plays some off-the-wall stuff and does really well with it, and he's been doing it with a faction that we have not covered in so long, a faction very close to my heart that I'm really excited to talk about, Genestealer Cult. Inez, you've been absolutely tearing up the tournament scene, tournament singles and teams with Genestealer Cult. What's that been like for you?
It's been really awesome. It's great to take a faction that, at the time of initial time of playing it, was sitting at a 30% win rate in our stats and stat check, and to take that faction, and then I think I went across the last three terms with it 17-2, which I can't really complain about. It's above my own natural win rate, which is somewhere in the 80s to 90s. Going above that is it takes doing well with a list that nobody's expecting, which just feels great. I was able to ride on the shoulders of giants like Eric Latharus, who've been innovating in this space beforehand, and then take it and really, I think, bring it to the forefront a lot more than a lot of people had been expecting. And we're starting to see, even just from that, the dividends that's paying out with the community, where there are now a bunch of people who are playing and doing well and then innovating on that space again. And it's really rewarding to see that kind of exploration leads to further exploration, right? To see people who say, hey, if you can do it, surely I can do it as well, which is exactly what I did. But Eric does it down in Australia where nobody notices or pays attention, and I did it in, the rest of the world. So, that's always going to be the winning formula, right?
Right, absolutely. No, and I think what you said is so spot on. You're seeing more Genestealer Cult armies popping up lately. There's a lot more excitement and chatter about it online in the Discord servers. And I'm personally, and is your success inspired me to pick up the old four-armed Emperor claws. And I literally copy-pasted your list for a few games. And then I just took it to DreamHack, but I made some changes and modifications to it myself, which I switched detachments. I had a great time. And there's a lot of things going on with Genestealer Cult right now. They have a lot of different detachments that are all doing well. And that's a large part of what this conversation is going to be, folks. Inez and I are going to talk about Genestealer Cult and kind of what they're doing and their uprising in the meta. And then we're, of course, going to talk about his specific army list. We're going to break it down. He's played more or less the same Outlander Claw army for 3-4 tournaments now, and who knows how many practice games. So we're going to really draw on his experience to explain how it all works and his approach to the different matchups. Then in part two, we're going to actually take you through that. We're going to take you through Inez's experience from all these different tournament games and really go through how he approaches Chaos Space Marines and Space Marines and World Eaters and Tau and all these different problems, different board states and missions. So if you're interested in learning Genestealer Cult, both to play with them or against them, I can't tell you enough to subscribe to part two on our Patreon. That's patreon.com/AOW40K. $5 a month gets you access to this part two, 260 plus other part twos for the same show. And of course, our wonderful Discord server where you can literally talk to Inez directly in the Genestealer Cult channel. Doesn't get better than that, folks. Inez, I'm really excited. Talk to me about your journey with this codex, right? We are all down on it going into its release. It was obviously a big departure from its index attachment, and it was very off-putting at first. But it seems like you and Eric and other players have really started giving it a second look. And why is that? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think when the book came out, our kind of initial response of it was looking from the Ascension Detachment in the index to the new host of Ascension Detachment was, where is all the stuff that I was kind of crutching on gone, right? We lost demolition charges, we lost the ability to multiple 3-inch deep strike. Obviously, that went away with the index up with the update to free stratagems. We lost the +1 ballistic skill stratagem. Just it felt like your knees had been cut out from under you a lot when we went into the book, and it was very easy to look at it and go, wow, this is what I was doing before, but worse. And even if that's not strictly true, that kind of vibe catches on pretty quickly with the community, where everybody goes, well, this isn't interesting because it's what I was doing before, but sad. Why would I bother putting time into this? And then everybody but the most diehard people kind of abandons it, and that's how you end up with, I think the general term we use is competitive abandonment, right? None of the top players are looking at the factions, therefore there's nobody innovating on the list, there's nobody kind of looking at that direction. And for me, what it really took was the Cult Ambush change that came about a couple months, I'd don't even know how long it was into the book's release, but they changed the Cult Ambush rules so that you could, instead of coming through the ambush token system, you could come in through Deep Strike, and you could just bring the units down at the end of your movement phase. So it basically sped up the rate of recycling your units. Instead of having to wait a full turn cycle, now you were waiting half a turn cycle, because you could either, if your unit died in your turn, you could bring it down in your opponent's through the ambush tokens, and if it died in your opponent's turn, you could bring it back in your turn through the Deep Strike mechanic. Whereas before, if you died in your opponent's turn, you had to wait a full turn cycle. So it was very much, and that's where most of you die, obviously. So it really slowed down the pace of the army. And then when you didn't have access to things like the lifting units up stratagem from Ascension Day, that was one of the, picking up two units of battle in turn was one of the big ways that you generated advantage in the army during the index days. Losing that and not having that speed made the army feel very slow and very stuffy to play. Whereas with the change, there's a lot of that. The rate of recycling is much higher, and that was enough to just be like, okay, that's a direction that I can pull on, and that's a competitive advantage that I can work towards, right? It's that recycling mechanic. And then how can I best lean into that? What do I need? Well, for me, it became a case of looking at what other people in that space were doing. Eric Lathurist down in Australia was playing an Outlander Claw list, and I kind of took that and then tweaked it up a little bit for my own personal style, moved away from things like pure strains that I found a little underwhelming, put in some more scoring, put in some more lone operatives to kind of get that early board control. And then I was very happy with that, and I took it to a few tournaments, and the rest is, as I suppose, history. But it was kind of just looking at that space of, I have this regeneration mechanic that's really powerful. How do I lean into that? Okay, early board control, generating like blisteringly fast advantage on the table. I want to be out on the table using scout moves, using sticky objectives, creating like this very fast pace of play, especially given the Pryonix's missions generally encouraging you towards going second, having an army that wanted to come out the gates strong and fighting, with scout moves, sticky objectives being the big things there. You had a very strong turn one plan. And that was kind of the space that I was looking for in the current environment. Was I need to play a list that's never unhappy losing the turn roll outside of very specific circumstances. I want to be happy going first because my army's good at it, or second because it's Pariah Nexus, and never to be like, I never want to roll into a game and be upset with the first dice roll of the game, right? And Outlander Claw felt like it gave me the direction to do that. And, from there, it's been a very successful run, and I cannot complain at all.
That's awesome. I love that. Looking for a space to innovate, especially because the way Warhammer is now, there's so many great players. They're so well known and connected through the internet and content creation, all that stuff. And it can feel like there's no room to innovate in Warhammer, because it can feel as though like, oh, the great players have already figured all the good stuff out. But no, I mean, clearly this is like a very like inspiring and innovative way. They like literally inspired Green Genestealer Cult players to pick up the Codex and try it, despite its initial challenges, which you highlighted really effectively there too. Like a lot of the stuff that we leaned on in the index days just doesn't exist or work the same anymore. And that one subtle change that really changed it all, I would say, for the army is just that when a unit dies, instead of having to go into the blip and then wait until your opponent's next movement phase to even show up into the corner of the table where it can't do anything relevant, like all that has now turned into just go and deep strike. And fix the recycle problem and makes your army actually come back to life a little bit, which I think is wonderful, because it actually feels like Genestealer Cult and how it plays. Now, you said that you landed on Outlander Claw because it gave you kind of that first, second turn that you wanted and stuff. What was the actual list that you decided to take to these tournaments?
So the actual Outlander Claw list, so I played two slightly different variations, but it was literally a one-unit change. So I'll run through the one that I played for Champions Cup and LGT, and then I'll mention what the previous version was, because that's going to be the easiest way to do it. So it's Outlander Claw, which for anybody who doesn't know is your bikes gain objective secured, so the ability to sticky, and all your bikes and vehicles double their OC, putting basically every model in your army to OC 2, 4, or 6, which is just a wonderful, wonderful threshold to sit at. The army is 3 Kelermorphs, one of which has the Cartographic Data-leech enhancement, which is basically flavor text. We have a Reductus Saboteur. We have 1 squad of Acolyte hybrids with auto pistols. They sit on your home objective and give you CP. We have 6 squads of Acolytes with hand flamers. No demolition charges, no icons, just pure raw output, 5d6 hand flamer shots. We have 2 squads of Neophyte hybrids with the garage sale of random guns that they have. We have 2 Goliath trucks, 5 Achilles Ridge Runners, 1 with a heavy mortar, and 4 with heavy mining lasers, all with spotters. We have 2 Atalan Jackal squads, and then 3 Goliath Rock Grinders with the clearances in our air for even more flamer shots. The previous version of the list, I had 1 additional squad of Acolyte hybrids with auto pistols instead of a Neophyte hybrid squad. I found that they were a little underwhelming because their damage output just kind of sucks, and I wanted some more OC and some more sticky in the list, so went down the route of more Neophyte hybrids. But that was the previous version.
Gotcha. So I know what this does because I'm a Genestealer Cult enthusiast and I love what this army does. But and is like whenever I talk to people or show people, I have to spend 5 minutes of the round explaining like everything my army does and how it operates on the table. In your words, can you just kind of go through like what this army is, like give it the spiel, and then also then your strategy with it and kind of how you use it on the tabletop?
Yeah, for sure. So the sort of general principle of the list is you put it on the table and you have very roughly 200 OC. And your job is to make sure your opponent scores the least primary they can while you score the most you can, and you get your the secondaries you can along the way while interacting with your opponent's you kind of aim to precision scalpel out your opponent's most important units with the reasonably limited but better than it looks damage that you have, and then control the rest. The way you do that is you have a lot of models that regenerate, that bring back models in the command phase, or that just come back through the call ambush mechanic. You have scouting, high OC pressure, and you have ridge runners. And the idea with the ridge runners in this list is that they are the majority of your sort of long range damage output, and you're trying to play very, very carefully with them along sort of deep firing lanes where you kind of identify one precision target, you line up so that you can get like the sliver of one of each of the two ridge runners onto the corner of one model through the tiniest gap in the ruins, and then you put a bike squad on that gap afterwards. So you kill the thing and you don't get shot back, and then you use your mobility and they go back into reserve stratagem to lift those ridge runners up or to put them somewhere else and do the same thing next turn. You kind of try aim to get 2 to 5 turns of output out of the ridge runners while effectively taking no damage back by using your board control that you have through this pressure and regeneration you have to keep your opponent pinned in their deployment zone or away from those key firing lanes. And then you have sort of high OC, high mobility, things like the Goliath trucks are more than happy to just dive 12 inches towards an objective, spit 20 OC out behind a wall or onto an objective and take it off your opponent, while you maintain kind of this wave of pressure going your opponent through your deep strike mechanics, your transports, and then you hold your objectives with kind of very low pressure, like lone operatives, like a truck that's limping about on 3 wounds that can just sit there and keep it safe. And then you have lots of ability to react in your opponent's turn between the Kelermorph's reactive shooting when your opponent walks close, the reductive saboteur's reactive explosion when they walk within 9. You have the reactive move stratagem for the bikes and the ridge runners. You have reactive minus 1 damage and a reactive 4 vulnerable save for the various different vehicles. It's lots of whatever your plan is, I'm going to interact with it in the way that is most beneficial to me and most negative to you. And you're just trying to continually just chip away at your opponent's primary. When you go first, the game plan is pressure wave, get that sticky objective onto the middle objectives. The bikes have scout 9. They're able to generally on most deployments get onto at least 2 objectives, put that permanent control down, and then you can pull backwards or go forwards. If you go forwards, your opponent suddenly has to run at the objectives with nothing on them and lose units into all of these hand flamers that have wound rerolls against units on objectives, or let you have them. Either way, I'm happy with that. Or you pull backwards, make your opponent run to you. In the case of something like a melee army like orcs, they're going to have to expend all of their small chaff units very quickly or put big things onto objectives, at which point, again, this army doesn't suffer for killing units on objectives. It's things off objectives it can struggle with occasionally. But you kill those things, and then suddenly your opponent only has big units left that they can do secondaries with. And then, you have a new outlet into the game, which is attack their secondary play or attack their, maintain your primary yourself, use all your reactive abilities. Maybe you battle shock them on the way with the Kelermorph. They don't even unsticky the objective, right? There's lots of little failure points for your opponent's plan. And because the army has 23 asterisk units in the sense that it's 23 and then whatever you get back, your opponent is almost always trading down with whatever they're trading with. Because, if I put 2 units out to kill your 150 point unit or your 80 point unit that you've put on an objective, you kill both of them, I get one of them back. We traded 1 for 1, but my unit's now effectively got on a redeploy stratagem for free, right? And sometimes you'll hit the low end of that, sometimes you'll hit the high end of that, sometimes they'll both come back, sometimes neither of them will. And it makes it a very volatile strategy for you and your opponent, which can be very stressful. But that's a lot of the kind of like the general idea you're going with.
Definitely. So it's primary pressure. It's very fluid and reactive to kind of doing what's annoying for your opponent. And you're basically trying to outscore them across the game in the sense of like you have the objectives, you have OC everywhere. You can contest theirs relatively easily as long as you can get there, and you can hold yours as long as you can prevent them from getting there and killing you. And even if they do get there, you kill them back in response, and then you start trading up, and then over time create a material advantage between that and then also resurrecting your squads. I love it. I think it's really cool. And I love the way you described those ridge runners also, like picking the far extreme angles, like 2 slivers of a ridge runner shooting through a ruin where the bikes are then move blocking so they can't get shot back. That's beautiful. So my question is, is like, where does the damage actually come from? Like, it looks so unassuming. I mean, like, there's some flamers, hand flamers are strength 3, AP 0. The Kelermorphs are like cool, but like, they're a total of 6 shots each for 60 points. Like, you throw a grenade, how does this actually add up to enough? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I would definitely describe it as 4 Ridge Runners and then pocket sand damage is kind of how it feels sometimes. It's a lot of, I've thrown stuff in your eyes, and while you're distracted, I punched you in the chest, right? That's a lot of the little stuff. In a general sense, it isn't a lot, but a lot of not a lot adds up. Between grenade, demolition run from the bikes, which is a pseudo grenade as long as they're at full strength, you get 5 dice on the 4-up to do a mortal wound for each one. You've got grenade, which you can do for free with the saboteur. You've got a little bit of indirect to finish off models here and there. You've got lots and lots of, the list does have 42 flamer shots. That's not, it's a pretty decent amount of flamer shots, especially when 30 of them have wound rerolls. And then with the Ridge Runners having their crossfire ability, they apply +1 AP against a given target, with flamers having to ignore cover. Suddenly strength 3 AP 1 with full wound rerolls is like actually meaningful. 2 squads of them will probably kill a Space Marine squad, right? That's kind of the threshold you're getting to. And when it's fairly low impact, you can do that quite a lot. And then very little of this list is terrible in melee. The Acolyte squads have 17 attacks in close combat. They benefit from the crossfire AP. You have the Rock Grinders, which have decent shooting, decent melee. You have tank shock, right? It's a lot of, if you need a thing dead, you can usually get it down to like a sergeant who's ticking around, and yeah, he'll probably pick up a squad or be annoying somewhere else, but the bulk of that damage output has been removed. And as long as you can precision scalpel like the most of it and then deny the primary that guy was on with 1 bike, it doesn't actually matter if you confirm the kill or not. You have neutered its output. It dies to an Overwatch next turn, or it walks into a Kelermorph and gets shot next turn, right? That's kind of what you're looking for. You very rarely have to kill things. But there are also times situationally where your opponent walks their katana onto an objective because they had to charge you, and then 2 squads of Acolytes put 8 damage on it, grenade finishes it off, and you're like, oh, you can this list has the damage that, the way I would say it, the way that I've described to people, you can kill 2 katana that aren't an objective or 3 that are, as long as you get the sequencing right and the timing down. And, katana are fairly durable. The second you hit into stuff that's like Armor of Contempt and a Feel No Pain, right? 2-up armor save, Armor of Contempt, and a Feel No Pain, maybe you're going to struggle to do it in one go, right? You're never killing, like 5 Deathwing Knights with their Watcher in the Dark. You're not killing them on that turn. But you can get like 3 of them and then put a bike on the objective or an Acolyte on the objective, and then they don't hold it. And then they have to charge those guys because they don't have guns. So people get very used to in 40k this concept that you have to confirm kills, you have to remove a thing. This list has so much OC that it's okay to just leave a couple dudes. You'll get them later. They're not causing that much of a problem. They're not gonna, they're not going to do that much. They're going to charge a squad of Acolytes. Great. That squad of Acolytes was in the open. It was dead anyway, right? As long as you can make it so they don't get to more stuff, or they don't get to into your backfield, you don't have to confirm kills to be advancing your game state, as long as you're stopping your opponent from doing the things that will result in them winning the game, which is just scoring points, right? Killing things is a thing we do to get further in that agenda of making it harder for our opponent to score points and scoring points ourselves, but it is not the be-all and end-all unless you're playing that one secret mission. You are allowed to not fully kill things in a game of 40k. And Genestealer Cults is an army that kind of gives you the big, hey, if your plan was just to table people, you're going to have to work around that a little better. You can get away with not doing as much, with not killing everything in the game on the turn it steps out in the open.
That is really counterintuitive to, I think, what a lot of 40k players learn the game hearing, and for a lot of armies, it's very beneficial to confirm your kills and kind of remove targets so they don't cause annoyances for you later and things like that. I totally agree with you. GSC doesn't need to do that. It can absolutely not confirm kills and leave a few dudes doing whatever. But where does that kind of knowledge come from, right? That's not easy to figure out or intuitive. I mean, this whole list is subtle, right? All the damage is sandpaper, just death by 1,000 cuts type of stuff. And one of the other challenges to that is that you have enough damage to handle 3-4 Deathwing Knights, then out-OC it. But, if someone puts 15 Deathwing Knights in your face and then some Eradicators and Jump Pack Intercessors all at the same time, how do you handle that kind of stat check where all your damage adds up, kills a few things, neuters a few things, but you're not checking every problem at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the restriction on this army doing that much damage is based on location, not output, right? And I mean this in the sense that my vehicles can't be everywhere. My acolytes can't be everywhere. My free grenade, my bikes can't be everywhere. If you put everything in front of me and I activate my army at you, I'll kill you just fine. The army has the damage to do that. Only one of those, the first squad of Death Ring Knights is tough because of armor attempts. The second squad, not so much, right? Because suddenly my AP1 is doing it. I'm doing like AP1 against AP0 into Deathwing Knights is literally doubling your damage output. You go from failing 1 in 6 saves to 2 in 6 saves. So if I can kill 3 Deathwing Knights out of the 2-up save squad with the stuff that was in that area, well then I can definitely kill the squad that doesn't have that, right? You're just giving me the second you try to stat check this army, you reduce the efficiency of your defensive strats. I don't have output stratagems. I'm going to say there are none. There is a lethal hit stratagem that I have never used. I can't understand what it exists for, but it is there. But this army doesn't have output stratagems. It has Crossfire, which I can put on 3 things a turn, and then that's kind of it, right? The Ridge Runners are generally pretty good at getting that spread where you need it. Outside of that, like if you put your army in front of me, all you're stressing is your defensive stratagems, and if my entire army gets to activate, I'll kill you. So a lot of when I talk about like it being restricted is, if I've only got 3 squads in that area and each of the squads kills 1 Deathwing Knight, then I can only kill 3 Deathwing Knights. If you put yourself in front of my 23 units and each of my squads kills a Deathwing Knight, I maybe only kill 3 from the 2-up save squad, but I'll kill all the rest and I'll tag the Eradicators, right? Or I'll move block one of them and I'll pick the other 2. I'll surround it with bikes and then you'll move it and I'll reactive move away from them and move block the other one on the way through or whatever, right? There are lots of ways to interact with your opponent's turn as well as in your turn. And the damage output isn't thresholded by output stratagems. It's not like I'm sitting there like, sometimes when you play an army that has one really key stratagem, like you're playing Champions of Rust and you have your advance and charge stratagem, you get to pick one thing every turn that gets to do really good stuff. You're playing Dark Angels and you've got Honor the Chapter. You're playing, I'm trying to think of a non-Space Marine army. I'm struggling. There are no non-Space Marine armies in my head right now. But, you play an army, you have your key combo, you have your output stratagem, you have your enhancement, you have your big buff, right? You have your one thing a turn that goes and really does the thing. GSC doesn't do that. Everything just does its job. And that makes it harder to stat check in that sense. Now, there are some things that can stat check it. It has a very real problem with like toughness 12 and an invulnerable save. My loss at LGT was to a Tesseract Vault because I just couldn't kill it. It just played 2 until I killed all my mortal wound output, and then it was able to push at me and took me off the objectives, and it had gone second. Things like Riptides that don't touch objectives are awkward if they play at long ranges away from you. There are things that are difficult to play into, but generally you can lean into the side of, okay, I'll play the objectives and I'll deal with what I can. A Riptide doesn't hold ground that well. A Tesseract Vault does, unfortunately. But yeah, there are ranges of things that you can and can't deal with the army.
Right, absolutely. Makes total sense. And I find with Team 40K, it's really great because you can like identify a stat problem that you might encounter or just a matchup problem and just avoid it. And then like you can probably play 7 out of 8 things. And singles, you might have a bad match here and there, but who doesn't these days? 40K is a very wide and diverse game. So that makes perfect sense. I'm with that. In regards to your primary play, going first, because you kind of mentioned the Tesseract Vault and like the Hypercrypt army was able to just to kind of go second, outscore you while killing you. It's really easy for people to just get to 40 primary points when they're going second. So, you can try to get to 45 and 50 and create that primary advantage, but that's even not always the case relative to the mission or your opponent's army's ability to contest you, that kind of stuff. So how do you actually overcome your opponent's primary score? Because secret missions are so powerful in modern 40K, and when you go second, you just can sit on your butt and do nothing for most of the game and then win on turn 5.
Yeah, obviously, the first part of that is you have to make sure you're accelerating the game to get your primary, right? I need to make sure that I'm hitting, my 10s a turn in Scorched Earth and burning an objective. Scorched Earth's a bad example because it's the best mission to go first in because you could burn an objective and make it so much harder to Unbroken Wall. And you have enough battle line that the other ones are generally pretty tough. But in general, it's a lot of you are going to need to accelerate the pace of the game. If you are the person that is losing because you are going first, you have to play faster. You have to make something happen, which means applying more pressure. This army, I did speak about Ridge Runners playing very defensively. One of the nice things about Ridge Runners, they are Scout 9 and Movement 12. If you need to go and pick up the pace, you can drive a Ridge Runner squad 21 inches directly forward to your opponent's deployment zone and shoot something and charge something else and just be like, all right, cool, deal with this for a turn while I consolidate my board position. And then you play the other squad super safe, you use the defensive stratagem on it, and you can keep one alive and use one very aggressively if your opponent's, like, if you just need to pick up the pace. Same thing with the bikes. The bikes can go straight to your opponent's deployment zone, turn one, 2 demolition runs and a grenade potentially, and you've picked up a couple of your opponent's small scoring units, maybe one of their like assault intercessor squads, gaunts, ghosts, like things in that kind of weight class, and you're like, all right, cool, and now you're stuck there for a turn. I've got a turn of primary, I get my 10 in score charge, my 15 in take and hold, my 13 in linchpin, right, whatever the mission you're playing is, and you just accelerate and you just keep the pressure on. And then generally in games like that, when you go first, you kind of get 2 turns of the 4-up regeneration, because with the +1 on turn 1 and 2 to the ambush rolls, you get that 4-up. It encourages you to play that game very fast. So a lot of the time it's on turn 2, 3 flamer squads drop out of the sky. I'll jump 1 or 2 neophyte squads out of the trucks, and that 1 squad will come out of the trucks, and I'll keep a couple for later. But suddenly there's like 8 units on top of you that are all charging you and fighting you, and I'm, on average going to get 4 of them back. And that on average is a really dangerous word, because it could be 2 and it could be 6. But it's very good for just like keeping that pace up and making your opponent play in their half. And the idea is more, when you aren't going to win a game by winning on primary, your job is to make your opponent's secondaries suck as much as they can, which means killing all the small stuff. I don't care about their, like, if they're going to get Unbroken Wall on turn 5 and hold 40 primary anyway, cool. As long as I got to 45 and I crushed them on secondaries, I still win that game. And that's a lot of what you're looking for. So in singles, you're kind of playing like this race to 91. Make sure I get my 45 to 50 primary, get my 35 to 40 secondary, and then crush yours, make you secret mission. I want you to have to, right? In teams, you can sometimes get into the situation where if your opponent picks a secret mission, you can stop having to deny them primary, which then makes it harder for them to secret mission at the end. Because if your opponent's like on, they're going to get their home objective for 5 points for 4 turns for 20, but they're like be able to get onto a side objective every turn and threaten to hold it. And for turn 1 and 2, you take them off it and give them a 0 for that objective. And then they go into turn 3 and they're like, okay, cool. I am behind 20 to 30 on primary, or 10 to 20 on primary, whatever the difference is. I could pick a secret mission here to try to get 40 at the end. But there's no guarantee that I'll get that, because the game state, like Genestealer Cult, are very variable. You don't know what's coming back. You don't know how much capacity. I could just dogpile one of the objectives with 3 vehicles and 7 units. If a bunch of them come back and, are you going to take that off me for Unbroken Wall? Are you sure? Are you willing to take that risk? But if you pick the secret mission, you cap your primary at 20 now. So now that unit that's on the top left objective that I've been throwing units at every turn to take off, but not killing, maybe it's something like the Avatar of Cain, he's not great at holding ground, but he's great at killing units off an objective and threatening to hold that ground. But I can take it off him quite easily. But the second you pick a secret mission, you're locked at 20, you were always getting your home, I don't need to take you off that objective anymore, and suddenly the Avatar doesn't impact this game anymore. So you don't pick a secret mission because it makes me have to keep throwing resources in there, and it maybe keeps your secondary score up, or lets you, maybe you threaten to get a 10 on the last turn and you get 25 secondary, but you were never a threat at getting that 30, getting that 40 against me. And that's really nice in a team environment. In singles, it's a little bit more of the just rush your points up, crush their secondaries, and kind of treating it like a teams format differential. Every point of secondary that you can't score now is a point I don't have to score. So if I can, if I sit there and my opponent's on 5 points after the first 2 turns, I know that they're probably not getting past like 32 on secondaries. Well, then I know that my score, I need to get past 84 to guarantee the win now, right? And it's kind of just dragging that increment down like it's differential, even though it's singles. It's just, where can I guarantee I don't lose to the secret mission?
If you are listening to this, it probably means you play Warhammer 40k. And if you're playing Warhammer, you need a lot of dice. Baron of Dice is where we get our dice from. They produce amazing different kinds of dice. We just recently got all kinds of different faction dice shipped to us, which we use on our stream games. But not only do they look really cool, but they're highly customizable. You can get different symbols, corners that are square, corners that are round, different shapes and sizes, different sided dice. It's all the rage. And they're customizable in color and design as well. They are so cool looking. Not only that, but they feel great to roll in your hands. I've never held dice that roll and feel this good. Not only that, but they are scientifically perfectly balanced. There are tons of case studies on people rolling thousands of dice and recording all the results that they get. And sometimes you might get a die that rolls just a few too many ones. We've all had to throw it out before. These dice are not like that. They are perfectly balanced to a T, thousands of rolls, perfect distribution. If you want to take your Warhammer game seriously and make sure the dice are not screwing you over, get some Baron of Dice dice.
This is a great explanation. I really love how you explain that. And not only like the mindset of how you can stop contesting primary to keep your resources alive as soon as they take a secret mission, and you have a lot of ways to beat a secret mission, and you can focus on secondaries, kind of destroying their chaff units, which you've already explained kind of happens naturally by sticking those early objectives, and then your opponent sends the trash out to unsticky them, and then you get the trash out of their army on turn one. Like that, it all comes together in a very subtle but significant way. In that it just comes together and works nicely. I love it. So talk to me about CP management. You mentioned, secondary advantages and creating that is a huge portion of your game plan here. But are you like cycling cards at every opportunity to try to see more of your deck? Are you like spending strats for like grenades and tank shocks mostly? Are there strats in your detachment that are really what you hold your CP for? How do you spend them?
Yeah, so generally the detachment is, I want to say fairly CP light. It's not one that like you're not burning stratagems on output, right? And that's one of the really big things. Like you occasionally will use, grenade and tank shock to kind of confirm a kill where you maybe lowered a little bit, or you just like want to extend your play a little bit. You've dealt with a thing, now you can afford to go and charge something else, and you're just like, okay, I'm just going to like start weakening this so that it's easier to deal with next turn. That's a lot of what you're doing with things like tank shock. It's just, oh hey, this Thunderwolf squad, I'm going to tank shock them when I charge them with a rock grinder because I know they won't kill me and they'll have to take desperate escapes when they fall back. Okay, I'm going to kill one wolf on the way through so that there's less to deal with next turn, right? It's a lot of that when you're doing those kind of plays. Grenade is almost always tries to come out of the Reductive Saboteur, who does grenade for free. So that's one that you generally can get like 2 or 3 uses of it out of her if you're playing carefully with her. Embarking her in transport, getting her out, grenading at 8 inches, and then keeping her safe. That can be a decent way to like kind of maintain your CP there. And you have the auto pistol acolytes on your home objective who give you a CP on a 4-up in each command phase, which is another like you assume 2 CP in a game. Sometimes you'll get more, sometimes you'll get less, but generally 2-ish CP a game is fairly comfortable from that data sheet. Defensively, you have the redeploy stratagem for the Ridge Runners and the bikes, and potentially a truck as well that you might use. You might have rapid ingresses that you'll use to get like acolytes onto primary if you're trying to maintain that high velocity playstyle of just getting primary. Your opponent can't push into you, but maybe they can shoot you off it. You rapid ingress an acolyte squad onto an objective, you get the primary, you walk out next turn to do something. That kind of thing could be things you're looking at. You have defensive stratagems between the forward avoidable save for Ridge Runners, the reactive move for Ridge Runners and bikes, and the -1 damage for trucks. But very frequently those will only be good on 1 or 2 turns of the game. You're kind of like, there's only going to be 1 or 2 turns where you really need to keep the Ridge Runners alive from the shooting, because if you're getting shot, you keep them alive, you shoot back. And hopefully at that point, you've dealt with the primary threat, you stayed alive, you've dealt with it now. You should only be really using the redeploy 1 or 2 times, right? In the early turns. So you're kind of turn 1 and 2, you generally don't redraw. If you draw a double dead card turn 1, you're just kind of like, it sucks, I won't draw them later. And you kind of move on with your life. And then after that, you're a reserve army that gets units back. It's like you should be hitting basically everything you can draw after that, right? Unless your opponent's covering their backfield and you draw behind enemy lines. If you've got a couple of units of acolytes in trucks and a couple in deep strike, what secondaries are you drawing that you can't reliably score? So turn 1 and 2, it's kind of, you take what you can get, you'll stretch a little bit for them, but you don't usually redraw that heavily. Redraw is more of a thing on like, you kind of treat redraw a little bit like you did in Leviathan pack with this one, where it's like it's a turn 4 or 5, just to make sure that I'm topping up my score kind of thing. Oh, I've drawn a 3-point card. Let me see if I can hit a 5-point card to just like lock the game up kind of thing. Outside of that, the list is generally like, I don't want to say CP light, but because you're not really spending CP on output, they're more just like, you're using it more as play extensions. It's all defensive technology and redeployment stuff. You're very rarely I generally feel like I have a lot of CP with this list. Like I'm usually sitting on like 3 or 4 going into turn 3, and I'm like happy to spend them like fairly egregiously. If you want to blow them all in one go, you can definitely do like a rapid ingress, pick up a unit, a reactive move, a grenade, a tank shock, and a charge reroll, and like blow them all in one turn if you want to. I've had some games where you hit 6 and you're like, oh man, I don't know what to do with these, and I'll just spend them all, right? Because you're just like trying to lock the game up. But yeah, generally one of the nice things about this army, your units just do their job. You really, they don't need help to do it. And, when anything you can get out of your CP is more of a nice bonus or defenses, which is very different from a lot of other armies in the game. You are not, it doesn't feel like it really stresses your CP management too hard. It's quite nice in that sense. It's a fairly comfortable army for CP.
That's really surprising. And I don't disagree with your assessment at all. I mean, like, I completely think that you are using the CP for like grenades and tank shocks sparingly when it's play extensions, basically. Going the extra mile or just making sure you confirm the kill. And then there are, redrawing the card is more of a convenience thing. I totally agree with that too. And you're just trying to keep yourself alive, and that's really it. But whenever I played this version, the Outlander Claw list, I found my CP starving. I basically 4-up involved Ridge Runners every turn because I just got shot back. Maybe I was messing that up, and I should have been more block the angle type of stuff. But it's a fascinating compare and contrast moment. And I'm surprised you even have acolytes with auto pistols if you're swimming in CP like that, because that's like their only function, right?
I mean, you need something for your home objective anyway, right? So it's nice to just have a unit there. And it's not that you're swimming in CP. Like, I could spend 5 CP per turn with the army if I wanted to. It just rarely feels like you need to. One thing I will shout out for this army that doesn't come up with everything, because you have so many units, things like grenade are usually the last thing you do, right? You're going to grenade on the last activation that can go into it. So if I have, 3 units in a neophyte squad next to a thing, I'm only going to use grenade if the first 3 units didn't kill it and I still feel like I need the help, right? It's going to be Flamer Squad, Flamer Squad, Flamer Squad. Oh, I rolled with all 3 of them. Okay, let me grenade before I shoot the Neophyte Squad, right? That's kind of what you're looking at, rather than it being like, hey, I'm jumping this squad out. It has to grenade before it shoots. You get a lot more granularity in using stratagems like that. I get to see the result of my turn near enough before I do, okay, the Saboteur has our free grenade here so that I've definitely got something to do with it. But if I really need it over on that side, I can do it with the 3rd unit that's over there. I can see if the first 2 just kill it, right? And I can fire the Ridge Runner, get the +1 AP, fire the first 2 units. Oh, you high rolled saves. Okay, I guess I'll grenade over there and I'll spend my CP. Or if not, I've got my backup, my safe grenade of just doing some extra damage here before I charge this thing to tag it up or hold it or whatever, right? And it's very much like that level of granularity, specifically with grenade, really helps you with conserving CP as well, because if you just roll well on your damage, you just never needed to use it. And a lot of the time, I think people use grenade to make sure they can confirm the kill, and Genestealer Cults are a little bit better at doing that with a little bit more safety.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense there. I like that. So one question I really find fascinating is you have 3 Kelermorphs and a Reductive Saboteur. Now, most Genestealer Cult players run a package very similar to that because they're just great lone ops that do a lot of interesting things. I'm really curious how you use them and like specifically like placement and what you're looking for, because they're so fragile and so easy to get killed and not get the best value out of. Like, how do you really squeeze the juice out of those lemons?
Yeah, so the Saboteur's job is generally to stand on an objective behind a wall within 1.5 inches of that objective. She has a 9-inch coverage bubble of if you walk here, you take more wounds on the 2+. So if you're within 1.5 inches of the objective, they're 7.5 inches across. You can guarantee beyond that. You could ideally sit behind a wall. You don't get taken advantage of the fact that it's a 9-inch aura on a 12-inch lone operative. If your opponent walks 9.5 away from you and shoots you, you tend to die. So it's a lot of sit in the corner of a building, and things like the UKTC boards and WTC boards that have all these center board ruins, or some of the GW boards have that as well. You just sit next to an objective, cover it, not necessarily be on it, make yourself low priority. Chuck your indirect over the wall at something to clean up a couple cultists here and there, making your opponents have a coherency problems on cultist squad stretched across backfields is one of my favorite things to do with her. I killed 2 of them. I guess you don't have coherency anymore, and then they fall down to a 5-man. Suddenly their backfield isn't screened anymore, and you're like, okay, cool, I'll go take your home objective. Love to do that. That's a lot of the Saboteur's job. And then once your opponent either walks into the bomb or you stop needing to do that, she jumps into a truck, and then you kind of drive her forward, get her out, do her grenade, get her demo charge into shooting range, all that kind of thing. One really cute trick you can do with her that's worth shouting out for anybody who hasn't seen it, if you embark her in a truck and you firing deck her remote explosives, you can trigger the wound rerolls for disembarking from a truck over a wall against something you can't see. So if you disembark neophytes behind a wall and then have her inside the truck, she can indirect at the thing that's on the other side. The neophytes can then shoot her with full wound rerolls, or acolytes with hand flamers or whatever you got out of the truck, which is a really, really nice piece of tech for when you're just drive the truck 12 forwards, disembark on the other side of the wall that you sometimes have to do to get onto objectives. It's great for picking up random lone operatives that maybe wouldn't die to the Weber plus the Flamer, but will probably die with the full wound rerolls. Very, very fun to do, and nobody expects it. So that's the Saboteur. The Kelermorphs are kind of a lot of what you do
say on the Saboteur before we go to the Kelermorphs. That's really clever. And is that wall trick to get on the other side? I mean, playing on the objective to basically cover the objective, be behind a wall. That's great and very, very helpful. But then getting into the truck and throwing the things from inside the truck and just generally being a pain in the ass beyond that, and also that cultist murder plan for the backfield. the amount of reps you put into it and the specificity of your plays really highlights your expertise here. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Kelermorphs are one thing that I want to stress with Kelermorphs before I start with this. Kelermorphs are just 60-point dudes. It's okay if they die. And that's a real thing that I think is easy to forget with Genestealer Cult. Nothing in this army matters individually. It is about the whole. Now, it's great to keep them alive if you can just have them shooting 5 to 7 times a game, fantastic, great. But if you have to just put a Kelermorph onto an objective and just be like, that is a lone operative, walk at me because I'm holding, otherwise I will hold the objective, then it's still doing its job. If you were doing that with a lone operative lieutenant in a Space Marine army, you wouldn't be upset about that. And it's cheaper than that guy. So that's the first part, is that it's okay if Kelermorphs die. But they're also great at not dying. A lot of what I try to do with Kelermorphs is kind of push the frontier of my midfield, right? My units that are going over the front, my bike squads, the truck that's going to go steal your primary, etc., they go in the front wave. And then 12 inches or so behind that, there's kind of you're creeping up the rest of your army, taking up board space, preventing your opponent from going past you. And Kelermorphs are great at the vanguard of that second wave. They kind of poke at the front, they sit just on the firing lanes. Ideally they're if I roll a 1 on my dice, I can go, because they move when you walk within 12 of them. If I roll a 1, I can go sideways behind a wall, or I can tuck and pivot behind a building. Or if I roll a 2, I can go back behind the wall and just create these problems where your opponent has to extend into air, basically. You have to extend at a thing and then remove the possibility of me doing more, and then the second thing can do something, potentially. But your opponent doesn't always have a second thing. They often don't have a third thing. So it's well, if I have 4 resources there, you can do it with the first and do nothing, and the second does something. But that's not enough to generate an advantage when you're having to come over my front wave to get there, right? How much do you really have that can reach deep into your opponent's midfield? That's kind of the question that Kelermorphs are asking. And they're protecting the objectives. You sit hovering the full middle objective with 3 Kelermorphs. You touch the middle objective, you get shot by 18 shots at strength 6, AP2 death wounds, right? That's most of a Gladiator Reaper shooting you. Do you want that during your turn? Do you have a plan for that? And then they're all going to run away, and then they're going to come out and do it next turn. So you're doing it into nothing, right? And if I just kill your unit, well, then you didn't unsticky the objective, do it again, right? So they're really good at setting up that kind of inner vanguard. On top of that, they're also really good jumping out of trucks against things that are a bit more meaty, things like Riptides, Catan. You jump out of a truck, you get your full wound rerolls against the target of the truck shot. Kelermorphs are great at doing that. They can use firing deck from inside the truck. Against things like a Curse Cultist or blood surge moves from anything like a Curse Cultist, Thunderwolves, old one-eye Carnifexes, I guess. Probably don't do this against that. You can embark in, you can have a Kelermorph shoot them, and then have another Kelermorph inside your Rock Grinder. They blood surge into your Rock Grinder, and then your Rock Grinder firing decks with a Kelermorph and 5 hand flamers from inside, plus the main guns, and suddenly that unit that blood surged into you just took a bunch of damage, despite being in combat, right? So you're really good at abusing firing deck, they're really good at abusing not firing deck, and then they're just a lone operative that screens an area, is annoying to deal with, that can prevent your opponent from pushing at you, and just making them take problems. There are also some armies that have... and this is a thing that will very much depend on what the wording of your stratagem is as the enemy army. But there are some armies like Renegade Raiders that have an advance and charge stratagem that triggers in the charge phase. So you have to use the stratagem in the charge phase at the time of going, rather than being a movement phase stratagem that you would use after you advance, for example. And you can, your opponent runs a Legionnaire squad at you, goes, I'm going to advance and charge this Chaos Lord. And you go, cool, I'm going to shoot you with the Kelermorph. Take a Battleshock text. If you fail it, you can't use the advanced charge stratagem because you'll be battle shocked by the time that phase comes around. Which then the threat of you doing that makes your opponent go, well, that's it's a 28% chance that I fail that battle shock test. I think for Leadership 6, 28% chance, roughly a 1 in 4. Am I willing to risk a 1 in 4 at this stage in the game? Is the game desperate enough that I need to risk that? Maybe I won't even run the Chaos Lord squad at you because I don't want to risk the battle shock, because if I fail it, it's such a game breaker. And if I pass, it's just a Kelermorph or it's just an Acolyte squad, right? Whatever it is it worth the risk to your opponent? And Kelermorphs are really good at asking that question as well. How desperate is the game state that you're willing to take that risk at the moment? What if I get the battle shock, kill 2 dudes on the way in, you're charging a truck, suddenly you don't kill the truck because I -1 damage it, right? Or you battle shock and you can't even charge the truck, and then the truck charges you, right? It asks so many questions of your opponent, and it's so, I want to call it overloading. Your goal is to stress your opponent's ability to make the correct decisions. Now, that's not in a gotcha sense, right? Obviously, you should be, if you're playing an army like this, you should be kind with your opponent. If your opponent is going to walk into 12 of a Kelermorph, hey, Do you want to walk into 12 with the Kelermorph? This is the repercussions. Hey, do you want to walk with the 9 of the Saboteur? Is this your intent? And, be chill with this stuff. You're playing a lot of reactive abilities. Your opponent is never going to remember it all, especially while Genestealer Cults remain underplayed. Be chill with this stuff. But if you don't give your opponent a choice and they have to walk into it, well, then that's where the power kicks in. Your opponent suddenly becomes overloaded with decisions. It's so much easier to make a mistake when you are being asked so many questions. And that's the point of the list. Ask 100 questions. Even if your opponent hits a 90% success rate, if you expected them to get them all right and then they get any wrong, you're just getting advantages for nothing.
Dude, I love your explanation of this. I was down on Kelermorphs. I actually cut all 3 Kelermorphs out of my list, and I didn't run any. And I've genuinely really loved my list, so I'm still not sold on them like that. But man, you're making me want to put Kelermorphs back in there. Like, I don't sticky objective, so I don't get to cover the middle of sticky objective and then shoot it with 3 Kelermorphs for trying to put something on and keep that contested. But that's such a dirty play. That's so good. And I love the way you described them just kind of guarding your Vanguard, meaning like they're in a safe spot in the middle behind your army, behind some trucks and grinders and whatever, and then easy move back behind a wall on a 1 or a 2. It's really challenging for your opponent to deal with them, and if they want to deal with the stuff in front of you, they do get shot. Great usage there, and at the end of the day, they can just die. They're alone up at 60 points. That is the job sometimes, and I think all that utility, the battle shock play into the Chaos Lord example, like that, it all adds up to be so much value. And one of the challenges I find with the Kelermorph is that it's like an OC1 guy that costs 60 points and gives up Assassinate, versus basically any other thing I could take is 70 to 75 points, and that's 10 to 20 OC, does an amount of damage, has like grenades if I need it. So for some Devlins, I have that option more, and it comes back to life. Like that, that you can't undersell that. So like that's where I can't come from the I don't run Kelermorph's camp, is just like 5 more bodies. What's your take on that stance?
Yeah, and I think that's completely reasonable. I think one of the nice things about this army is there are so many different things that you can have in that. And I like the Kelermorphs because they feel, the way that I play them, they feel like repetitive output, where every other unit feels like it's fairly one-shot. I generally get 3 or 4 turns of shooting out of each Kelermorph, maybe 1 or 2 of them, in a given tournament of 5 rounds, 1 or 2 of them maybe shoot 5 to 7 times. In a given game, 1 to 2 of them shoot 2 to 4 times, right? That's kind of generally what you're looking at. And that, like the ability to have that just repetitive damage, the ability to have lone operatives, triple X just is picking up in the meta game, all these kind of things. Like, it's just nice to have lone ops, right? And like, we don't have lone op stratagems in Outlander Claw. I don't even think Ascension Day has one anymore, right? So you're just kind of very stretched. Like, sometimes there are armies that will stretch your ability to hold objectives, and it's nice to have that lone operative on an objective that you can just say, hey, this is mine, until you step onto it, right? And then you make your opponent step onto it, or you don't let them, right? And again, It's part of the component of sticky. If I sticky the objective and I have a Kelermorph on it, well, then you can't just throw your lone operative onto it. You can't just throw your idiot. It has to be something real. And if you do that and I retreat back, well, you put something real on it. Cool, now it dies next turn because it's on an objective. And it's just another layer of that protection of the stickiness, right? Like, I've made the objective sticky, the Kelermorph protects it a second time from indirect or shooting down range, right? You can't just shoot the squad of acolytes off it and jump like your 5 JPIs onto it, or jump back intercessors, or your I don't think Chaos Spawn have OC, but a squad of cultists, whatever, right? The random garbage you have, you need to put something on it that will actually make me want to move the Kelermorph. And if you don't do that, then I'll just stay there and I'll shoot you.
It's great how intentional it is, right? Like, when I see people just slotting 3 Kelermorphs into lists, I really feel like it's like a good data sheet. So I'm just going to take 3. That's the mindset. Lone ops good, shoot when you get in range of me is good. Like, it's got good rules, but you have an intentional plan for how it operates with respect to your army's strategy. And I think that's the difference, because like people who just like take Kelermorphs because Kelermorph's good really struggle to get the value out of the Kelermorph, because it is easy to kill.
That's totally fair. And there's also like a component side of this as well, which is the fact that this list has so many transports. Kelermorphs only take up 1 slot and only take up 1 firing deck. It is 1 Liberator all stubs. It is 6 shots for 1 firing deck slot, which means that a truck with a acolyte squad and a Kelermorph in it can shoot 6 relevant guns, whereas you can't if you're not in a truck, right? So you have to be like, there's so many different places that, in the Outlander Claw specifically, I can find value from one of their jobs in a given game, right? They might not be good at doing, one of them for a specific tournament, right? Like, they might not be great at holding sticky objectives against an opponent that's got, armigers that are just going to dive on them and they don't care about getting shot, right? Against Chaos Knights, for example. But they're pretty good jumping out of trucks and getting firing deck and getting full wound rerolls out of a truck. So I'll put 2 of them inside of a Goliath truck with a squad, and that actually might kill an armor group with a grenade in the truck itself and the tank shock, right? So suddenly that's a package that can go and solve a problem. Whereas if I had, 10 extra neophytes, well, they can't be in that truck, right? So there is, you are picking units to fit a game plan and building a game plan around the units you have. I can't run more hand flamer squads. I could run 10 mans. I find 10 mans a little unwieldy, and I find it's heartbreaking when they fail their comeback roll. So I would almost just rather have less of them. If I could have 9 squads of hand flamer acolytes, I probably wouldn't have Kelermorphs, but I can't, and I don't want 10 mans for other reasons, and I don't want acolytes with auto pistols, and neophytes have diminishing returns as well because their guns just aren't that great. So Kelermorphs are a natural expansion. Or I could look at things like, I could run metamorphs, but metamorphs don't do the job I want. They don't have wound rerolls. They're not lone operatives, right? Like, I want lone operatives. I want things that can go inside transports and take up 1 slot, and I want protection from my sticky objectives. Kelermorphs fill that job. If Kelermorphs don't fill that job, don't run Kelermorphs.
I get you. It makes perfect sense. I'm really excited to continue this conversation in part 2 with our patrons, because ultimately that's where we're going to discuss all the individual matchups in this list, and your strategies and tactics have been so evident that they vary for specific situations. Now, I know you've been playing your army for months now, and you have 20 plus tournament games, God knows how many practice games. You've got the experience, and it's so evident in the way you talk about your usages of your units. So that's what we're going to be talking about, like literally the plays this Genestealer Cult army makes, the positioning on the table, the approach into so many different archetypes. And if you are trying to figure out how to play against this uprising of Genestealer Cult, you don't want to miss it. So you can subscribe on patreon.com/AOW40K. It really helps support the show. We love doing this for you. This is my 5th year doing it, something like that. And I can't do it without all of you. So thank you so much for your support. We'll see you over there in part 2, everybody.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. theartofwar40k.com.